Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jerry Giuliano. I'm Denver's Chief Sustainability Officer, and I want to welcome you to this public meeting organized by the Alliance Center for the Future Forum, which is a caucus of Democratic Congress people who have gathered together to study and listen and engage with people like us on the important issues that affect our future, our collective future. Today's theme, under the general banner of future, is going to be climate change. Efforts to prevent the worst effects of climate change and to prepare for those that we can't avoid have been accelerating in the last year, and there's good news and bad news. The good news is very simple. Global greenhouse gas emissions annually are at or near their all-time high. Concentrations in the atmosphere are at their all-time high, at least since we've kept measurements during human history. And there are other indicators such as shrinking sea ice and so forth, and global temperatures, which are also at an all-time high, that obviously are cause for concern. But there's also good news, starting with what happened in Paris last December, when the nations of the world came together in an unprecedented manner to reach agreement on a very ambitious program to address the bad news that I mentioned a moment ago. Also, we're living in a time of great technological innovation and changing demographics and consumer preferences, which indicate very clearly to us that trend is not destiny, and that the future may very well be very different than the past, and our focus today is on the future. For the benefit of our members of Congress, locally Denver continues its national and international leadership in climate change. We remain in the top 10 cities in the United States in energy efficiency, in Energy Star buildings, in installed solar capacity, and in recognition of our leadership in this area. As many of you know, we were chosen by the Department of Energy a few weeks ago to host the 2017 Solar Decathlon. And in recognition of our leadership in the mobility part of climate change, we were also selected among the 7 finalist cities who are competing for a $40 million U.S. Department of Transportation grant to foster mobility innovation and change at a fundamental level for the United States. In Denver, our mayor, Michael Hancock, announced that Denver was now committing itself to the so-called 80 by 50 goal, the goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as a community by 80% from where they were in 2005 by 2050. And that very same day that he announced that, we held the first Sustainable Denver Summit, bringing businesses and government agencies and nonprofits together to produce over 100 written commitments to change, to get us on the road to meet that 80 by 50 goal. So now it's time to talk about the future, and we're joined by 4 members of Congress. I'm going to introduce very briefly each of them. First, representing the district that encompasses most of Denver, Diana DeGette is in her 20th year in Congress. She's a Chief Deputy Whip for the House Minority, also a senior member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and she's the ranking minority member of their subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. Representing the district that encompasses Denver's western and northern suburbs, Ed Perlmutter is in his 10th year in Congress, and he serves on the House Committee on Financial Services and on the Subcommittee on Capital Markets, Insurance, and Government-Sponsored Enterprises. And we were joined today by a late ad, Congressman Jared Polis, from a little further north. He is representing the district up around Boulder, and he serves on the committees on natural resources, education, and rules. He's alerted us that he has to leave before the end of the session, but at least he'll be here for the first few questions. And then finally, we want to welcome to Denver Congressman Eric Swalwell from the East Bay area of California. He serves on the House Committee on Homeland Security, also the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, where he is the ranking minority member in the Subcommittee on Energy. Now, what we're going to do today, because the purpose of the Future Forum is to hear from and engage with you. So I've seeded today's presentation with a few questions that are going to get things started, and we'll put them to the members of Congress, but we also want to invite you to weigh in with any related questions or thoughts that you have. It's okay to indicate not simply a question, but if you want to speak out, that's fine. Please be courteous, though, of the other people who are here, because we have limited time. I want to make sure everyone who has a question or would like to make a comment has an opportunity to do that. I do want to let everyone know, elected officials and members of the audience, that there are media here. I think it's always important to just be aware of that before we begin. There will be a tour of this building at 1:40, so we're going to have a hard stop. We're going to be very careful about being sure that we end at 1:40, so that those who want to go on the stool, I'm sorry, 2:40, so that those who want to go on the tour will have an opportunity to do that. And with that, I'm going to start our first question. I'm going to put this to the members of Congress, but then again invite all of you to weigh in as well. It's an election year, and there's a lot of people who have a lot of angst about the fact that there could be a change in the Oval Office that could actually, in theory, undo a lot of the good work that's been done over the last 8 years to address climate change. However, there are also voices out there right now who are suggesting that these changes I mentioned earlier, the technological changes, the demographic changes, the changes in consumer behavior, have gone so far, they've crossed several thresholds or tipping points, that it may not matter who the next president is, because these efforts that we've undertaken have taken on a life of their own that's essentially unstoppable. One such voice was actually Gina McCarthy, the head of the US EPA, and I heard her make these comments at the Climate Leadership Conference in Seattle a few weeks ago. And representatives of several major corporations at that conference agreed with her. Several people there said, you know, it doesn't really matter to us because we think we've crossed tipping points and these things are unstoppable. Not everyone may agree with that, so I want to ask the members of Congress how they feel about that position. Are we past a certain tipping point, or do the choices we make in November really matter to these issues?
Let me start. First of all, welcome to the 1st Congressional District, and especially thanks to Congressman Swalwell for coming here.
First time in Denver.
First time in Denver.
Wow.
And he's sold. He's sold. But I just wanted to comment as somebody who, as you heard, is on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. I was the main whip tasked with passing the Waxman-Markey bill, which was, of course, the climate change bill, the cap and trade bill some years ago that we passed through the House, and then it stalled in the Senate. The occupant of the Oval Office and whoever controls the majority in Congress are key. On my committee, we still have members who, as recently as a couple of months ago, denied that climate change even exists. And so when you have people, I think the only place you can find climate change deniers to this day is the halls of Congress. And what that means is when you're trying to do public policy, you can't pass policy that you can't pass energy efficiency policy, you can't pass cap and trade, you can't pass anything. And I'm a little surprised that Administrator McCarthy would say it doesn't matter who's in the Oval Office, because it's her agency that, of course, passed this Clean Power Plan, all of these agency rules designed at cleaning up our air, and which could be reversed with the stroke of a pen in the next generation. And so I would argue, I think it's wonderful, and I'm very committed to the idea that every level of government and business, from local government to our kids' classrooms to corporations, I think that's wonderful that they're committed to a clean energy policy and to reversing climate change. But ultimately, the nations of the world are the ones that are going to pass the legislation that goes through every facet of our government. And I'll let my colleagues talk about their areas of expertise. If we don't have that commitment in the Oval Office and in Congress, then we've got one hand tied behind our backs.
So I want to thank Representative DeGette and the Alliance Center and John Powers and everybody involved with the Alliance Center. It's very rare to have 4 members of Congress in one place for a forum outside of Washington, D.C. But it shows the importance, certainly not only the 4 of us, but many of our Democratic colleagues, and hopefully in the future more of our Republican colleagues share about the urgency of addressing climate change and carbon. There are a lot of exciting initiatives at the local level, exciting initiatives at the state level, including Colorado with our new renewable energy portfolio standard, and yes, on the international stage and through the clean coal plants and executive orders. But you know what? At some point, what we need to do is what many European countries have already done, which is find out a way to price carbon in the economy, some sort of carbon tax, and that doesn't have to be a revenue grab. I think if our Republican friends are going to be supportive, it'll probably have to be revenue neutral, and that's fine. But the urgency of doing this, only the federal can implement that. And hopefully that's something that we can get to, so that the externalities of a carbon-based economy are taken into account with regard to the pricing, and we stop the hand-over fist subsidization of our reliance on fossil fuels, which is what occurs both on the regulatory side, on the tax expenditure side, and biggest of all, on the failure to account for externalities side. It'll take a Congress that cares about climate change to do that, and I feel the national dialogue is moving. And I'm confident that an issue that even many of our Republican friends 3 or 4 years ago would say, oh, it's not happening, now have pivoted to, well, maybe it's happening. I don't know if humans caused it, or I'm not a scientist. And the fact that they've changed the way they talk about it shows a great change in the public perception and the education level around climate change. So it leaves me with cause for optimism that we will be able to address this in a bipartisan way in the federal level. I hope that will be part of the legacy of the outcome of the next election.
Sure, and thank you, Diana, for being such a great hostess here in Denver, my first time. Jerry, it sounds like the quantum theory, right? The 3 things happening at the same time. It's not happening, it's happening, but we didn't cause it, and it's happening, but it's not so bad. That's kind of what we've seen. But I just want to briefly talk about the Future Forum. It's 18 of the youngest members in our caucus, and we're celebrating our 1 year doing this. We've hit 12 cities now. This is our 12th city. We've talked to thousands of young people, and frankly, that's what gives me hope on this issue. Is when you talk to young people, and we've been to Manchester, New Hampshire, Dallas, Texas, Seattle. Whether they're a Republican, a Democrat, or most likely a young person who does not identify with the political party, on this issue, they know what's happening. They believe that we caused it and we have a responsibility to do something about it. But they also, 80% of millennials think that the U.S. should be investing more in renewable sources. So I think this is an issue that it doesn't have to be partisan for our generation. We understand it and we get it. And I think the biggest challenge is, will we show up in November to make sure that it's actually carried out?
Yep. I guess I would just add these things. You said inevitable. That was the key word in your question. It may be death, it may be taxes. Those are inevitable. But most everything else it depends on some human input. And I think we are at a tipping point, but with a Congress. So I also serve on the Science Committee with Eric. And the Environmental Committee, there's just no such thing as climate change. It's ridiculous in terms of the denial that's going on. And it requires all of us to continue to move forward and press forward. Technologically, there are 3/4 of all engineers that have ever walked the planet today. Scientists too. And so things are going to move, but there also has to be a political will to keep them moving. So I think we're in a good spot. It is moving forward. Science and technology and innovation have made some great strides, but the political will always has to be there because there is political resistance to all of this.
Before I move on to the next question, I just want to see if any members of the audience want to add to this question or their own comments on this question. Yes, Walker.
I'm Walker Wright with Sunrun, one of the nation's largest home solar companies. And we're definitely frustrated with the conversation in Washington, D.C. because when we look at who our customers are, we recently celebrated having our 100,000th home. And our customers, we think, are 40% Republican, right? So those who are deciding to go solar, deciding to generate their own power, are doing so for reasons of consumer choice. They want to generate their own, they want to have those savings. And it's like this competitive market forces. And we feel like that message is somehow getting lost in Washington, D.C. when some of your colleagues across the aisle don't realize that their constituents are choosing to go this way. So what's that disconnect, and how can we cross the line? Because we've recently passed rooftop solar legislation in South Carolina, for example, where we never mention the word climate change, and yet you're having people sign up in droves to generate their own clean energy.
Well, I think that part of what you're saying is part of the argument we're making. I remember it was in my subcommittee where we had the Solyndra hearings. Remember the Solyndra hearings where they were trying to attack the tax credits for solar energy. And I'll never forget, in the middle of one of this long series of gotcha hearings, one of my Republican colleagues, not a moderate, a conservative Republican from Texas, came running over to me and he said, "Oh my God, Diana, they're trying to eliminate the tax credits." And he meant his side of the aisle, and I said, "Did you just figure that out?" And so I think there is a understanding among many members of Congress. They're beginning to hear from their local businesses and their constituents that they do want renewable energy, but there is a disconnect with big coal and other types of energy. Now, one silver lining here, as part of the omnibus budget bill, the omnibus spending bill last year, we were able to renew the tax credits for solar and other types of renewable energy. And we basically held, people like us, held firm for that. So that will continue. That's something that's in the realm of what you say is inevitable. I think so many consumers are enjoying this now that it's really becoming inevitable. And I'll just say one more thing. Ed and I were in the Colorado legislature together when we, by voter initiative, we first passed the first renewable energy standard in Colorado. Remember that? And all of the energy companies objected to it, and they were strongly opposed, but it passed overwhelmingly. It was so wildly popular that a couple of years later, it looked like we were going to exceed the limit set. And so the public service, Excel was public service then, and the other companies actually came in, worked with the legislature to increase the standard even more collectively. And so this is something that's coming, and we just have to keep pushing it because it's commercially viable as well as the right thing to do for the environment.
For our next,
I would just say your customers should not reward bad behavior. So that's all. I mean, if it's important to them, they should make it known to their members of Congress. They should make it known at the ballot box. That's all.
Brett, you had a related comment.
I had really a question that it's really related to driverless cars and how fast they're coming. Singapore, they're starting to, this year, in fact, they're already beginning to deploy driverless taxis. They're doing driverless buses this year in downtown London. And the Chinese are moving ahead very rapidly. They have plans for deployment in 2018. The technology is coming fast, but the regulation is not coming fast. In fact, I was in California testifying before their DMV on their proposed draft regulations. One of their draft regulations was that driverless cars had to have a driver. It's just bizarre, and there are other regulations that are equally absurd. One of the problems that industry faces, I mean, America is a place where this technology has really grown up and where it's really come from here, Google especially in your state. And if we can't get some sensible regulations, if we're faced with the patchwork quilt of all of the states doing strange and interesting things, then without some federal overlay on that, they're really struggling. There were Senate hearings on this recently. I'm curious what the House intends to do.
We should mention, in the interest of full disclosure, that Brett Bridges is the author of the book, The Driverless Car Revolution, which is available on Amazon for $1.99.
Give it away.
Well, I'm a part of the autonomous vehicle caucus. There is one in Congress. I've been in the Google car, but when I look at my 2.5-year-old nephew, I can't help but think he will never drive a car.
Right.
Never drive a car. The iPhone is only 7 years old, so when he's 14 years from now, I hope he never has to drive a car, and I hope Congress, and the states have an important role to play, are able to, sort this out. And we see this as well with the sharing economy, making sure that our policies keep up to speed as technology, is bursting ahead. And so I'd be happy to talk with you after, Rudd, about what we're doing on that caucus. And I see it at home because we have a bus system in one of our office parks that has an autonomous vehicle. But to the point that Walter made about investments in solar, and you brought up Solyndra. I represent Fremont, California, which is where Solyndra is. And when I ran for Congress, knocked on a lot of doors to run against a 40-year incumbent. And this is where the Solyndra workforce, was in this area, and heard a lot of complaints about Congress. But not a single person in the 14 months that I knocked on doors said to me, why did the government make that awful loan to Solyndra? Not a single person in the backyard where people were affected the most. And I think it's because that there is this culture in our country that is, you try, you fail, you try, you fail, you try, you're Google. That's the mindset of solving these big energy problems. And so that program actually, by the way, has made money. That loan guarantee program has made money. But the fight goes on because our opponents in the climate change battle, they use Solyndra to say that that's everything government does.
Well, and just to agree, is the reason we have a loan guarantee program is to encourage entrepreneurship and development. Because if you could be assured that every one of those projects was going to succeed, you wouldn't need a loan guarantee program because commercial lenders would give them the loan.
Just, Rudd, I think you've touched on a much bigger question, which is the pace of change and the pace of innovation, which is just accelerating, whether it's in, environmental things or finance or you name it. And part of what we're seeing going on in this election is some people fearing that change and not being able to keep up with it. And so, across the board, you say, why isn't Congress on top of autonomous cars? Well, we're just, because we kind of move slowly on a lot of fronts, and there are a lot of places where there's a lot of change. And so, from a human psychology standpoint, we're trying to stay abreast. This is a Congress that doesn't want to do anything. That's a whole other question. But I think from a human nature,
those other people.
Yeah, the Republican Congress, I'm going to put it that way. But the human nature piece of this, and I think we're seeing it in some of the presidential primaries, is some people are very nervous about all the changes going on. Even though the technology and the innovation is great for us, it's still scary. And so as legislators, we got to take into consideration that kind of feeling as well.
Okay, as I mentioned, I have prepared questions, but knowing this group, I guess you probably have some of your own. So any other questions, Steve?
Well, and sort of building off of Russ's comment and also in the comments up here, given the ossified nature of the conversation about climate change in Congress, right? It doesn't go anywhere. You guys are going to argue all day long with your committee members about whether climate change is real. What are the non-climate change focused policies and incentives that the federal government can pursue to unlock some of this other technological change and let it happen? Are there things where you can avoid the conversation? Jeff and I were talking for different reasons about PACE programs, for example, which essentially avoids a conversation about energy and climate change and whether it's happening. It lets Walter put more rooftop solar on. What are the things you can work on that have nothing to do with directly the conversation about climate change, but unlock solutions that let people drive forward with autonomous vehicles or whatever?
Well, we have had some success in talking about talking about energy conservation and things like that. Last year, I passed a piece of legislation with Kathy McMorris Rogers from Washington State, encouraging small hydropower, and we're working to expand that because hydro is a really great source if done right, especially small hydro. We also recently passed a bill, looks like it's gonna pass the Senate. Turned out when we passed the energy bill in 2005, we inadvertently phased out the power source for LED light bulbs. Now, this may seem like a minor little issue, except for now, we didn't have LED light bulbs in 2005. So now you're gonna make LED light bulbs, which are hugely energy efficient, illegal. So we passed a bill to fix that. We're able to do some things like that, but you know, that's really tiny little baby steps. And I don't accept the premise that we can't talk about climate change in Congress, because I don't know what you guys think, but when I talk privately to many of our Republican colleagues, they know this is an issue that they're going to have to deal with. They're hearing from their constituents that they're concerned about it. And so I think what we have to do is figure out ways to begin to build those bridges in a non-threatening, non-politically confrontational way, and to start talking and thinking about how we can, you won't be shocked to hear, we won't do this before the election in November, but I think those conversations need to start happening now. And there are actually 3 or 4 little groups that are starting to have those conversations about what a policy would look like. And I think a key component of that is to focus on the innovation and financial potential that developing climate change solutions can have for business. So I don't reject the idea of talking about climate change in a bipartisan way. I think that it's essential that we do it, and I think it is beginning to happen. We just have to think about how to frame it in a way that's non-threatening to some of our Republican colleagues. Yeah.
And I would just add, have parity between the fossil fuel tax credits and renewables. And on the Science Committee, we see all the time efforts to, in the Department of Energy programs, reduce the budget for renewable efficiency funding at the Department of Energy, but increase the fossil fuel funding. So I think most renewable entrepreneurs say, put us on a level playing field, and we will win in the all of the above energy economy.
So true.
And I just say last thing, so Steve, on the Science Committee, we do deal with weather satellites all the time. And so there is some common ground there. I've learned not to say climate, I say long-term weather forecasting, which probably irritates some people in this room, but at least you can have a conversation. And we move forward on the satellites that really are showing us what's going on in a big way. Some of the Republicans represent NASA installations. So most of NASA's launch sites are along the coast. And there is big concern that with sea levels rising, that we're going to have to rebuild our launch capability elsewhere. And that's a lot of money. And so a number of these folks are beginning to really sit up and take notice. But within their party, it's still an anathema for them to do that.
Brian Patterson, I think you had a...
I was just going to say, in broadening the argument beyond climate change, and whoever you are and where you stand on that, all of the other issues are equally compelling in a technical sense. They may not be as environmentally categorized, but even things like electromagnetic pulse vulnerability, terrorist attack, resiliency, recoverability of our energy systems, particularly the electrical system, all demand a similar kind of attention. So rather than focus on the disagreements, we need to find those people who are motivated by any one of those. It's not wrong to be right, even for different reasons.
Correct.
So, we should put those, and I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir because I'm sure you all practice this in your own work, but we need to focus more on the common solutions and the, as we said, the NASA, why NASA would be motivated, or the Republicans, or the people, the rural people, or the urban people, et cetera, and look for the common thread is so strong that I think we're overlooking it. And a lot of what we do in the Alliance, and the reason we're associated with this Alliance, is about finding that common thread and making sure it's visible. Because sometimes in the heat of the other individual arguments about things, we lose sight of that common thread. And we need to hold it up high and say, these are all the reasons we need to get together. Energy independence, nationalism, globalism. You can go almost categorically through all the potential motivations that somebody might have to do the right thing here and find that common thread. And so we're a nonprofit that works in setting standards and stuff in the use of renewable energy. And we work with Democrats, Republicans, people that don't vote, people who vote, you know, businessmen, entrepreneurs, big corporations. And it's always about finding the common thread and finding the common motivation. And I don't care if somebody's motivated by greed, in a sense, as long as the greed isn't harmful, you know, and they're doing it for profit reasons. I don't look at a nonprofit any differently than a profit-making organization. If they're both motivated to do what's right.
I'm going to kind of go back and forth across the room. John, I think you had a question.
So I just had a permutation on Steve's question, because I think we all have to deal in hope and reality here, and we are all hopeful that Congress will take action. We're hopeful that the EPA's Clean Power Plan standards are going to be upheld, those sets of things. We also know that creating change in the short term in Congress is very difficult. I do think, though, there are other forums that in states across the country where change can happen, whether it's state legislatures, whether it's in front of utility commissions, whether it is, you know, progressive utilities themselves that can drive some of the innovation and drive reductions in carbon emissions around the country, where there's more hope for much faster change on specific local and state actions. I guess I'm wondering if you all feel there is a role for members of Congress to facilitate and push and help in some of those decision-making forums while we all wait for the rest of Congress to come along at its very slow pace.
Let me say, John, I think you're absolutely right, and I think a mistake that many federal politicians made for a long time was just waiting for the magic wand of the federal government to come and pass cap and trade, and then we'd all be happy and we'd solve the world's crisis. And I think over time, people have actually realized that that is not, and I tried to say that before, look what Denver has done. Look at what the state of Colorado has done, California, you know, so people have been working on this on an individual and on a collective basis. Certainly, from my perspective, I'm always, I'm always an eager participant in those conversations, and in places where I can be helpful on the federal level. For example, extending the tax credits for renewable energy so that individuals and companies can to develop that technology. That's something I'm always happy to do that. But ultimately, the way I look at it from my perspective, I'm a senior member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee and a member of the Democratic leadership in Congress. If I don't spend most of my time as your representative trying to get some kind of comprehensive bipartisan legislation through so that the federal government can add to all of that growing chorus, then I'm abrogating my duties that you elect me to go to Washington and do. And that's ultimately where I'm happy to help in every way I can and to advocate, but I think if I can pull this off, then that's what you want me to be doing, frankly.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. There are a lot of places around the country where a difference can be made, whether it's environmental or transportation or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of places for offense. There are a lot of places for defense too, because the other side sometimes, let's take Flint, Michigan. All of a sudden, we got a disaster when it comes to clean water. And so people, it's campaign season, so I'm thinking politics all the time. But it's about power too, and I appreciate your comments, but sometimes rationality goes out the door in some of the things that we have to deal with. And you're talking about rational beings. So everybody in this room, we all are very cognizant of the fact you gotta look for your opportunities and seize them. You gotta be prepared to defend your victories and keep things moving forward, and understand a lot of times you can do it by rational discussion and somebody making a profit, somebody wanting to do the right thing, but a lot of times you gotta have more votes than the other guy. So.
Okay, question back here.
I am Kathleen Matthews, an MBA student at CU Denver, and my concern is on the consumer side of renewable energy. For an individual family to have confidence to invest in, say, solar panels on their roof, that's a decision not to be taken lightly. And with things that happened in Nevada recently, where the rules changed, and all these people invested money thinking they knew what they were going to get and they were going to contribute to a positive environment. What can Congress do to give consumers that confidence to move forward in something like solar panels?
Well, I mean, we did just expand the tax credits. And I mean, I think what we need to do is we need to stop whipsawing around. And that's one thing, I don't know how to answer that, but we need to have certainty in what the tax code is for businesses and individuals, and we need to let people know what they're going to be able to deduct.
RJ, I know you've been for a while.
To touch on the whole piece about inevitability, it is true that there are a lot of business people that do think that this momentum has created its own set of inevitability. But then one business person in Nevada, Warren Buffett, can actually pull the plug on the solar program because he's got that kind of power. One of the places where inevitability is being recognized very severely is at the Department of Defense. And
Yeah.
Brian over here talked about security, defending against EMPs, terrorist attacks. I'm a member of Environmental Entrepreneurs, and we screened The Burden, which is a film about how why the military is switching to renewables as rapidly as they possibly can. And I'm not a big fan of war, but ultimately what the last two wars were consumed in was defending supply chains. All of a sudden they start doing solar out in the field, and they've actually reduced the number of casualties. So they get it. They get it that it's about protecting the troops. Many military bases, including Cheyenne Mountain, are islanding themselves. They are protecting themselves from the grid because the grid has not advanced as rapidly as possible. This building, Brian is leading the charge on a DC microgrid for the Alliance Center, so it is technologically possible. However, what these members and former members of the military discussed last week was your colleagues are saying, no, defending the troops means more fossils, more fossils, more fossils, and there are threats to eliminate funding for the Department of Defense to actually invest in more solar, more wind, more microgrid technology, which they have already said to their leaders, their democratically elected leaders, and their bosses ultimately, this is what's good for the troops, this is what is saving lives. So one of the potential places for common ground is to join forces more actively with those military leaders across all services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. They're all thinking about this, whether it be cybersecurity, whether it be islanding their bases. This is all happening rapidly now. And the pace of change is fast, and a lot of resistance to that across our society. But the military is embracing change for a lot of different reasons, and there is a great way to move forward along that path.
To an earlier comment, the fact is, for national security purposes, you may be prepared to process or put forward renewables. That could be the reason, or for somebody else, it could be environmental, it could be a bunch of things. But don't delude yourself. Those same folks can just say, sorry, we're not going to spend money on solar out at Buckley. They've done that.
And they will do that.
But that's because they got a crappy installation.
No, it's not.
Well, but
Yeah, it is.
again,
I know the
at the
guy that
end of
did.
the day, you need to be electing
I'm not saying it's
people
not crafty.
that you think will support that. Now, the more pressure they get from industry, the more pressure they get from the military, the more pressure they get from citizenry, then it works. That's how politics works. Right now, the pressure comes from some couple guys in the fossil fuel industry.
Oh, which ones?
You know, so
You got to turn the question about Nevada around a little bit and say the pressure that needs to be applied there. You know, the current stakeholders in the public utility electric field are the Public Utility Commissions and the utility executives, right? They're the primary stakeholders. Much too small a stakeholder group when you talk about renewable energies that are going to be distributed to millions and millions of homes or buildings around the country. It's a new constituency in a way for that energy source. And that pressure to change the laws in Nevada, or whether it's federal laws or, you know, here in Colorado, need to come from the people to our Congress people by votes and other means to empower them to stand up for the rights of those stakeholders, individuals who are now in the power business as private citizens. Just the way we got into the computing business and broke up the monopolies of IBM and the monopolies in the telephony of AT&T. Those companies are still in business, so they survived by changing their business model. So it's not a win, lose, or a live, die kind of scenario. We need to not simply deregulate, we need to re-regulate to take into account these new modalities of energy sourcing and use that didn't exist 100 years ago when we put in place the Rural Electrification Act of 1935 and all the subsequent utility regulations that exist today. They're too old and they need to be revamped.
Thanks, Brian. We have time for about 2 more questions, but we're scrolling contact information for the members of Congress who are here. So if you can't get to your question or comment today, you can contact them. Way in the back. Is a question? Not behind you.
Oh, okay, well, I think in addition to auto registering and creating mail-in ballots for millennials and Hispanic voters, as much as possible to get some support for these great initiatives. And I really appreciate the non-adversarial approach that many of you are taking, the more kind of business partnerships that we can create and NGO partnerships and government partnerships, the better. I think we need a vision that the Democratic Party needs a Kennedy-esque vision, and it, like the space program, and it needs to be about these sorts of issues, and that gets industry excited, that gets government excited, that gets voters excited, that gets kids excited about science in schools and about marketing, and I'm in the marketing for and global sustainability course with at least 5 other people in the room at UCD, and framing is all. And so some kind of unifying, invigorating, motivating, empowering vision that gets the country excited will take care of so much of this. And then follow through. It's not enough to get out there with the message. There then has to be this constant follow through and tapping all of the people in this room, including students and kids, to keep pushing it, to keep it going. But think how energized all those different industries were at that time and what it accomplished.
For me, I can identify because I was elected in a district where, again, we have Tesla, nearby. We have, so many innovative. Apple is not too far away. There's so much innovation going on, and then these constituents who work so hard and toil away and think big send me back to Washington, D.C., where it is the most incremental environment possible. And you're right. John F. Kennedy once said that the American by nature is an entrepreneur, an inventor who builds best when called upon to build greatly. And we don't think big anymore when it comes to solving our energy challenges. In California, we have a drought, and we're not thinking about desal or RO2. We're thinking very small in how we address that, and that comes from the top. And if we don't see that in Washington, I think that trickles down to the confidence people have in government's ability to solve this problem.
yeah.
Okay, we have time for one more question over here, Mona.
Great, hi, thanks. Your Congressman, Representative Polis, said he would advocate for a price on carbon. I'd like to ask you how you would vote for that if you were presented with legislation for a price on carbon. We won't get into the details about where the money would go, but I think that's what the economists, both conservative and liberal economists, have said a price on carbon will really help our situation. So.
I'm going to double down on that question. So beyond how you would vote, if you're comfortable talking about that, but with a sufficiently strong price on carbon, would you as a trade-off offer to the other side eliminating certain command and control regulations? Do we need a CAFE standard, for example, an auto fuel efficiency standard, if there's a sufficiently high price on carbon?
I like it. I think it's the right direction. Give us a bill. I mean, that's the problem right now. Is we can't vote on immigration reform, student loan debt aid, gun violence. I mean, give us an environment where we can vote on that and move us forward. I think all three of us are open to that debate. But right now, we're under the Paul Ryan family plan. We're home for 2 weeks right now. We're not doing anything.
What he means by that is that Congress is barely in session this year at all, and so it's hard to get a running start when you're never. I always tell people you might be happy that we're not in session very much this year because heaven knows what could result from it. But I think there's so many urgent issues that we have to take care of. We should be there voting, and I think we'd all support a tax on carbon. I mean, as I said at the beginning, I was the main whip getting the Waxman-Markey bill through Congress. It was a tough bill to get through because, frankly, our Republican colleagues didn't send a team out onto the field. And so we had to pass that bill with all Democratic votes. And we had people from the South, from the North, from the West, from the East. We had all different members of Congress with different financial interests in their districts. And it was hard to put together a bill just with those interests. I think that, and this kind of goes to the CAFE standard question. I mean, we have CAFE standards right now. So I'm not going to say what I would negotiate on trying to negotiate a new bill with the Republicans until we actually sit down and talk about it. Sadly, since 2009, when we did the Waxman-Markey bill, a lot has changed. We've got a lot more data about the effects of climate change. We have a lot more risks to our seacoasts and our large cities. We have a lot more going on, and so I'm not gonna start negotiating in public against myself before I've even talked to the Republicans about that. But I just think that not all of them, but in their heart of hearts, most of them know we need to do something if we can just take the political tone down and we can really start to talk about the hard, fast issues. I'll just give you one anecdote from when we did the Waxman-Markey bill. So we were trying to talk to our Democratic colleagues from the southern United States and Florida about why we had to give incentives to move to more renewable energy. And many of these people were from high coal producing states. And they said to us, like people from Florida, they said, we can't move to renewable energy. We don't have any renewable energy down there. And I'm like, are you kidding me? The Chamber of Commerce tells us that you have all these days of sunshine every year. And so, getting people out of their very local, parochial mindset is just, and it's not just Republicans, it's Democrats too. And so I think what really has to happen is a robust bipartisan conversation. And just to give you hope, there are some of those conversations started, as I said.
Yes, to your question. And too much speculation on your question. Because, Diane and I have already voted on cap and trade, okay, which we thought would bring a market-based kind of system to bear. It didn't go, it got through the House, never got through the Senate. So bringing it back to politics and power and policy without the right Congress, House of Representatives, without the right Senate, without the right president, it's a great hypothetical question you ask. But it's not real until you have the power to do that.
Right.
And that's your all responsibility, okay? We're working our fannies off, we're gonna get reelected, we're gonna do what we can. But until we have some people, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, of like mind, It's a hypothetical question that you asked.
Yeah, that's right.
But the answer is yes to your hypothetical question. And I'm not answering your question.
You know, I have to say, listening to the three of you, particularly Congressman DeGette, what you talked about negotiation, you've obviously read The Art of the Deal, right? So that you're being guided by those principles.
Oh my God.
Well, thank you very much.
Professionals.
Thank you very much, everybody. I would, in conclusion, like to thank the Alliance Center for hosting this event, and thank the members of my staff. You know, the entire Office of Sustainability is in the room right now, all three of us. And most of all, I want to thank the members of Congress who are here. You know, all the weekends that they have to give up, all the travel delays they experience, the horrible meals they have to tolerate, the cancellation of vacations that happen at the last moment, the late night sessions when we're all at home, with our various entertainments, and they're waiting for a vote to come up. And I just want to let the three of you know, it is noticed and it is appreciated by all of us. Thank you very much.